So do you think that if Democrats came around to supporting nuclear power, you could be supportive of these subsidies for renewable energy, which most would argue are the future that we do need to get to limit climate change and have a cleaner future?
I think there's an agreement to be had there. You got to understand, members of both parties have voted in the affirmative for, subsidies associated with solar panels and so on and so forth, or tax treatments. I think tax treatments are the better way to go as opposed to direct subsidies. I think direct subsidies do not work. We only need to look back at some of the disasters that have occurred, not just in the energy space, but across the spectrum. When government does direct cash injections to certain companies, that is not a good idea. We should not be doing that. I think if you're going to go with broad treatments in a tax code that allow and breed more investment in these spaces, I think there's a real deal to be had there. But you got to include nuclear in that, because if you don't, like we said at the beginning of this back and forth that we're having, you're not going to build a consistent energy matrix that can power economies today, in 3 years, in 5 years, and in 10 years. You might accomplish this in 15 years, but how many families have to suffer on the pathway to utopia? I'm not going to sign the American people up for that.
It seems that, if we could get this nuclear baseload, which, a lot of municipal power operators have said that you need the nuclear baseload and then you can have the renewable energy.
100%.
Would you be supportive of, instead of investing in new fossil fuel exploration, to instead invest that money in nuclear energy?
Well, two things. Number one, I think when you talk about investing in exploration, we got to understand, we don't own, as the United States, a natural gas or an oil production company. There are private companies who operate in the space. If we're going to give land leases, then we should actually, in good faith, give the permits for those leases to be pumped. I do not think that the proper course right now is to pull back public land leases from the federal government. I don't, because our energy matrix is not consistent enough. Now, and the second point on that is, even if we say, okay, we're going to go in tomorrow, Speaker Pelosi calls us back next week. If the Easter break is over, we're coming back next week, we're going to do this right now. Even if we go in and we actually reform the regulatory environment around nuclear, which is what you have to do, it'll still take the nuclear companies 3 to 5 years, maybe 7, for those to become operational. You still have to run an economy those 7 years. So I think it's important for people to understand you can't just cut off one before another one is in place. I think if you have a consistent energy policy for a decade in the United States, and then you want to look at that matrix about oil and natural gas, then you can look at it in the progression. So that's where I'm for. I'm an all of the above person. I'm not picking and choosing. I'm not yes you, but no you. I think from a tax perspective, we should be consistent, because I think that just promotes markets. I think we should. From a regulatory perspective, we have a lot of work to do in the regulatory space. One of the things we're seeing right now under the administration, they trumpeted a few weeks ago about the 9,000 oil leases that they granted, but they're either slow walking permits or the permits they've issued when they're fought in court. The administration's not fighting back against the lawsuits. They're just letting it go. Well, what does that tell oil and gas producers? We got to be consistent about this stuff across the board. Unfortunately, the administration is not being consistent, but there's too much at stake from just how our economy is going to function over the next 10 to 20 years to play games with this or to pick and choose what our energy source is going to be.
Mm-hmm.